In the following video, we would like to introduce you to the local Minnesota history that you might not have been taught in school. This state is the homeland of the Dakota people and is actually not named Minnesota, but Minnesota-Makoche. Indigenous people were here long before colonizers arrived on their land. However, many people and places that we see today are a reflection of the nasty effects of colonization. Additionally, many of these places hold cultural significance to the indigenous peoples of Minnesota-Makoche, including the Dakota and Ojibwe peoples. For the next 10 or so minutes, we will take you on a small tour of areas of Minnesota-Makoche and teach you about the indigenous history behind these places, as well as introduce you to aspects of Dakota language. Remember that what we show in this video is just a brief tour, and that every part of land we step foot on belongs to indigenous peoples. Without further ado, Haumatakiapi, or hello my relatives, and welcome to the true history of Minnesota-Makoche.
The first area we're taking you on a tour of is a portion of Minnesota called Mendota, which is right here on the map. The word Mendota is a version of the Dakota word Bedote, which we'll talk to you about later in the video. The Minnesota River runs through the historic area of Mendota. This river had many sacred Dakota sites on it, as well as Dakota villages. Dakota people used the Minnesota River to travel and communicate between villages. Treaties that were broken by the United States government eventually forced all of the Dakota people in Minnesota to live on a small strip of land along the Minnesota River. The Dakota people did not have enough land to get food from, so many of them starved. Tensions between the Dakota people and the U.S. government led to the Dakota War. The main high school in the Mendota area is Henry Sibley High School, which is where I went to high school. This school was named after a man who played a part in the removal of Dakota people from Minnesota. Alexander Ramsey, who was the first governor of Minnesota, made Henry Sibley the person in charge of fighting against the Dakota people. Henry Sibley helped Ramsey to kill and remove Dakota people from Minnesota. It is important to remember this history and how the government hurt and damaged Dakota people. Because many people spoke out about the name of the high school, Henry Sibley High School will soon be changing its name. How does it make you feel to learn about this history?
Along with Mendota, we'd also like to talk about Oheawahi. Oheawahi is one of the sacred cultural sites that Dakota people honored along the Minnesota River. It is a prairie with the sites of the Minneapolis and St. Paul skylines in the distance. You can also see Fort Snelling, which was a concentration camp for Dakota prisoners during the Dakota War. This land was once the site of a beautiful prairie and oak savanna with plenty of native grasses and wildflowers. Today, this area, which is also known as Pilot Knob, is a part of a 10-year nature restoration plan. Oheawahi was a gathering place, as well as a site for ceremonies and burials for different indigenous tribes in Minnesota, including the Dakota, Ojibwe, and Iowa tribes. This area of land is also significant because it was the place where the Treaty of 1851 was signed. This treaty gave 35 million acres of land to the United States government. Oheawahi consisted of a burial site for many of the people who died while being kept in Fort Snelling during the Dakota War. The nature restoration occurring at Oheawahi aims to not only bring back a variety of plants, but to undo the influence of white colonialism. Learning about the history of land and giving respect to it is an important part in the process of decolonizing the land.
Learning and speaking indigenous languages such as Dakota is very important. There are not very many people left who speak Dakota, and many people are trying to change this by learning and speaking the language. Let us start by learning how to pronounce the name of an important cultural and historical site to the Dakota people of Minnesota-Makoche. The word Oheawahi translates to a hill much visited. Let us walk you through the pronunciation of this Dakota word. As you speak Dakota, think about the history of this language and how you are helping to keep Dakota language alive. Oheawahi. Oheawahi. Oheawahi.
For the Dakota people, their story of creation takes place at Bdote, where the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers meet. It is where the first human came into existence, and because it is their place of origin, this area is incredibly special and means that Minnesota Makoche has always been their homeland. For non-Indigenous people, this area is more commonly known as Fort Snelling. Have you ever visited Fort Snelling? Most people, including us, have only been taught about the history of Bdote and the role it played as a military site throughout the 18 and 1900s. Yet, as we talked about previously, it was first the birthplace of the Dakota people. However, in a horrifying turn of events, it would later become a concentration camp for them during the U.S.-Dakota War of 1862. So not only had the Dakota people already experienced forced removal from their homes, but during the war, over 1,000 of them, with most being women, children, and the elderly, were imprisoned on their own land, and hundreds of them died during their time there. The fort continued to operate until 1946 and has since become a historical site for the state. Until recently, the full history of Bdote was not publicly recognized, and it still continues to be ignored in Minnesota schools, which is why we are sharing it with you today. And while recognition of the history is a start, it is also important to recognize that there is much work to be done towards apologizing to Indigenous people for the awful events which took place here.
Join me in speaking another Dakota word that represents an important part of Dakota culture. Bdote means where two waters come together. Bdote was and still is a very important place to Dakota people. As you speak this word, think about how speaking Dakota makes you feel. Bdote, Bdote, Bdote.
On the west side of Minneapolis, there is a town named Wayzata along the shores of Lake Minnetonka. The name that it has today was changed by white settlers from the original Dakota name of Wasiata. This land was first lived on by the Mdewakanton Dakota, which means dwellers by the sacred lake. They are one of the 7 council fires, or one of the 7 bands of Dakota people. From the start, they used the land and nearby water for hunting and fishing. However, in 1851, the Treaty of Mendota was signed, and the U.S. federal government forcibly took over as owners of the land. Governor Ramsey and Henry Sibley were behind this treaty and soon opened the land for Europeans to come in and build settlements. While Dakota people would be placed into reservations and later be forced from Minnesota Makoche during the Dakota War of 1862, Europeans took the opportunity to build a town that has since become a rich suburb of the Twin Cities and has mostly forgotten its indigenous history.
Spirit Knob in Wayzata is a place that was very special and important to the Dakota people. The Mdewakanton Dakota people often visited what is now called Lake Minnetonka, which they called the Big Water, to hunt, fish, and gather maple syrup. On the shore, there was a huge mound of land where Dakota people prayed and honored their loved ones who had passed away. This is called Spirit Knob and is the highest point of the lake. The area around the lake was known as holy ground to the Dakota people. They believed this place was home to the spirit of Manitou. The Treaty of Mendota took millions of acres of land, including Lake Minnetonka, away from the Dakota people. The Dakota people fought to keep the area of land around the lake because of its cultural significance, but the U.S. government refused. European settlers proceeded to live on this land and still live there today. However, Dakota people continued to travel to Spirit Knob throughout time to pay tribute to Manitou. Today, there are many large mansions in the area that was once the place where Dakota people respected and lived.
After learning more history about the state of Minnesota Makoche, there are a couple of locations that I invite you to learn how to pronounce in the Dakota language. Wasiata means north and referred to the land north of Lake Minnetonka where Dakota people once lived. Wasiata, Wasiata, Wasiata. Lake Minnetonka was originally named Bdei-ia-taka, which means Big Talking Lake. Bdei-ia-taka. 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 While we've only given you a couple of words to learn during our video, it's an important start, and we hope that it inspires you to learn more about the Dakota culture and Dakota language.
We have traveled to so many different places in this video. Mendota, where Dakota people once lived but were pushed out due to unfair treaties. Oheawahi, a beautiful savanna overlooking where different people gathered and buried their loved ones. Bdote, the Dakota place of origin where two rivers meet. Fort Snelling, where Dakota people were imprisoned and suffered greatly. Wayzata, where Dakota people lived off of the land at Spirit Knob and honored the spirit that lives within the earth. As you can see, many beautiful and painful moments of history exist in these places. Every bit of land in Minnesota-Makoche was once inhabited by indigenous people, including the land you're standing on right now. It's important to learn about the history of the people who were here long before us, and to remember that you are merely a visitor on their land. Thank you for traveling with us today. Take a moment to think about where you live and what history took place on that land long before you were here.